All right, let's take you now to the UN Security Council. That's where the head of Monusco, Bintou Keita, is briefing the UN Security Council on the state of affairs in the DRC. Let's listen in.
The AFC M23 offensive, through confrontations with the FARDC, has resulted in mass displacement, as well as an influx of combatants and escaped prisoners. All of this has heightened the vulnerability of girls and women to conflict-related sexual violence. The Joint Human Rights Office has reported on hundreds of cases of such violence in North Kivu, in South Kivu, and in Ituri. Impunity breeds recidivism. It is therefore absolutely essential to systematically document these cases so as to guarantee that all victims get justice and reparations. The humanitarian situation in the eastern provinces remains critical. We've seen a dramatic rise in humanitarian needs. Clashes with the M23 have compelled hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee. Displaced communities are often subjected to pressure to go back to whence they came, although security conditions there are not adequate. Humanitarian access remains restricted in various areas due to insecurity and the presence of armed groups. The lengthy closure of the Goma and Kavumu airports is a serious obstacle to the delivery of aid. The fact that the banking sector is not operational in areas under de facto authority is also complicating the humanitarian response, as well as the lives of people in general. In Ituri, the upsurge in attacks committed by armed groups, as well as clashes between these groups and the Uganda People's Defence Force, the UPDF, have exacerbated violence against civilians, increasing humanitarian needs and complicating access. Since January, over 100,000 people have been forced to flee in Jugu territory alone. This deterioration of the situation is occurring against a global context of a financing crisis. The 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan is, for the time being, only 8.2% funded, compelling humanitarian actors to engage in extreme priority setting.
Mrs. President, distinguished members of the Council, in this challenging context, Monusco remains fully committed to implementing its mandate as set out in Security Council Resolution 2765. The mission has intensified patrols and established mobile operating bases in Loda and Ahar. It has also been facilitating government-led consultation with armed groups in Ituri since January 25, leading to the surrender of 2,216 Zaire elements, the handover of 103 weapons and ammunition, as well as a reduction in security alerts. Monusco continues to protect civilians responding to attacks in Jugu territory, providing temporary shelter and assisting with medical evacuations. In North Kivu, Monusco has strengthened cooperation with authorities by donating vehicles and enhancing joint patrols, reducing armed criminality. The arrival of the new force commander on 10th February 25 and the establishment of a temporary force headquarters in Beni have bolstered coordination with the FARDC, notably in ADF hotspots areas. In Goma and other areas under the M23's control, Monusco continues to face restrictions on its freedom of movement, including roadblocks and a 48-hour notification requirement for convoys. The mission continues to engage with the AFC M23 on matters related to the implementation of its core mandated responsibilities, urging respect for international law, including humanitarian law and the Security Council mandates. In recent days, some restrictions on the movement of Monusco in and around Goma have been eased. For instance, M23 is temporarily allowing United Nations vehicles and equipment to cross the border into the Democratic Republic of Congo and permitting civilian personnel to cross over 1 day per week. In Goma, the mission has been able to resupply its bases with Monusco military escorts. Mrs. President, distinguished members of the Council, I'm concerned that the ongoing violence in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is undermining the country's national cohesion. As more people flee the Democratic Republic of Congo eastern provinces to government-controlled areas in the west, disinformation labeling them as infiltrators or suspect of is spreading, in particular on social media. Attacks, albeit isolated, against Tutsi and Swahili-speaking Congolese citizens, along with the resurgence of hate speech, undermine social cohesion. I urge the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo to intensify its effort to combat hate speech by adopting the recently resubmitted law against tribalism, racism, and xenophobia, to hold accountable those responsible, and to continue to affirm the diversity of its people. I reiterate the mission's commitment to accompany all actors' efforts to promote social cohesion and prevent the spread of hate speech in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the wider Great Lakes region. Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, Monusco remains determined to support regional peace initiatives underway. I encourage all regional peace initiatives to adopt a gender-sensitive approach. I welcome the appointment of 2 women to the joint SADC-EAC facilitator panel. Furthermore, it's vital for the Nairobi process to take into consideration the needs of female combatants in armed groups. As per Resolution 2746, Monusco has continued to support SAMI-RDC troops, providing them with logistical assistance and facilitating medevacs, as well as the repatriation of soldiers fallen in the line of duty. The mission also stands ready to make available for its capacities for the implementation of a future ceasefire. The dramatic deterioration of the security situation in the east of the country has had a major impact on discussions between Monusco and the Congolese authorities about the gradual and responsible disengagement of the mission as well as the transition in South Kivu. The implementation of the South Kivu government's provincial transition roadmap has been suspended after the AFC M23 seized Bukavu. The joint working group's efforts, the working group being made up of the government, Monusco, and the UN country team, their efforts with a view to setting planning modalities and mission disengagement from North Kivu and Ituri have also been compromised because various planning scenarios are now outdated. Nonetheless, the mission would like to reaffirm its determination to continue disengagement talks, as well as talks on the transition together with the government.
Distinguished members of the Council, we must direct all our efforts towards securing an unconditional ceasefire. Implementing Resolution 2773 is crucial to ease the suffering of affected populations and to maintain the Democratic Republic of Congo's sovereignty and territorial integrity. I reiterate Monusco's readiness to support its implementation. I call on the Council to take concrete measures against those responsible for serious human rights violations and complicity. Furthermore, I reiterate that lasting peace in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo can only be achieved through a political solution. I encourage all parties to recommit to dialogue within regional peace processes and ensure women's participation in negotiations. Lastly, I recall the necessity of the urgent reopening of Goma and Kavumu airports, which are lifelines for humanitarian efforts and key to the rotation of Monusco's troops. I strongly call on all parties to respect their obligations to protect civilians, in full compliance with international humanitarian and human rights law. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Ms. Keita for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Charlotte Slinte.
Madam President, Excellencies, the Danish Refugee Council has been working in the Democratic Republic of Congo for over 16 years, including in North Kivu and in Turi provinces.
All right, let's come out of the UN Security Council. Of course, we've been hearing from the head of Monusco, Bintou Keita, and she's been briefing just on the state of affairs on the ground on the DRC, largely speaking around the humanitarian crisis unfolding in the eastern parts of the country, especially talking about women and children subjected to violence and tens of thousands of people, of course, being left displaced. Also speaking there about Monusco remaining committed to its work in the country and continuing to protect civilians where it can. Of course, you will recall that earlier this month, in fact, SADC announced a termination and withdrawal, a phased withdrawal of its military deployment in the DRC after a series of setbacks to SADC as well as the SADC mission in the DRC, that is a semi-DRC, following the M23 seizure of mainly Sake and Goma by the M23, which also led, of course, to the death of around 18 soldiers, 14 of which were South African.